Hello, hello, hello. This is Peter going live from, well, I was going to say sunny Spain. It's not. It's but it's absolutely pouring here. It has been for the last 4 days, and I think it's going to be pouring again for another week or so. Anyway, welcome to the live stream. It's the Wednesday after the Bahrain test. Should we call it that? It's Ash Wednesday as well, actually. And it's the day after Jim Clark's birthday. Remembering Jim yesterday, got a nice email from Sally Stokes, his former, Sally Swartner, his former girlfriend. She always sends the email in green font with a yellow underline, which I think is quite nice. And yeah, lots to talk about, I think, post-test. Hopefully most of you have seen, and thank you for watching, those who have, the video I did with Scarbs over the weekend, in which Craig Scarborough talks about the test and the various conclusions that may or may not be drawn from the test. Not a lot new going on with the cars, as predicted, because this is the end of this current regulation. So all the teams focus very much on 2026. And we'll have a video very shortly coming out with Scarbs' thoughts on 26 and how that looks and what we can expect from 26 in terms of the cars and the power units. Quite an interesting one. Not a long video. We'll go into much more detail as the season progresses. And I've been talking to a couple of the FIA or F1 people involved in the formulation of those regulations, which are not yet complete, I've got to say. So, yeah, that's it. I'm rambling on. Just want to make sure that everything is working. I think it is. So I'm always a bit nervous at the stage of the live stream with the technology. Also, bearing in mind we're in Spain, nothing against Spain at all. The infrastructure is brilliant. I've got great internet. But the reality is it's pouring with rain. There's a lot of wind. So I'm just hoping the internet stands up to the strain of what we're doing. And you can see I've got a fire. Where's my, yeah, over there, behind me, just to bring a bit of warmth to the new studio here. Won't need that too much longer this year, I don't think. So what's been happening? Gene Hackman passed away, or we heard that he'd passed away with his wife. Very sad circumstances, still very much an investigation there. I mention that because I actually got to know Gene, I wouldn't say well, but I got to know him when he was at his peak. I think he'd just finished filming Mississippi Burning, and I met him at Long Beach, and we kind of didn't hang out, but we stayed in touch. And he was obviously very into motor racing. I'm not sure how many people know that, particularly Formula One, but his son Chris was pretty good too. And he went to Macau one year to try and help Chris get a drive for the following year. It didn't actually happen, but he spent a lot of time with Teddy Yip, I remember. And he came over to London one time, and he was staying, I think, in Browns, was it, at South Ken? Anyway, we met for lunch at South Ken in London. And afterwards, we had a walk around Hyde Park, the full circumference of perimeter of Hyde Park. You know, 3 or 4 hour walk, really, in those days. Well, it probably still is. And, yeah, I'll always remember that with Gene. Lovely guy. Very, well, cynical is the wrong word, but very unimpressed with Hollywood and all its politics. Even then, and obviously that became one of his trademarks later on when he moved to New Mexico. But he was very feet on the ground, lovely guy, fascinated by the politics of Formula One and the similarity between Hollywood and Formula One and the backstabbing and so forth. So we talked a lot about life, and I'm very sad to hear he'd passed away in those circumstances. So Gene Hackman, chapeau to Gene Hackman. I've been, rainy days are always good days for sitting down and going through our motor racing books, and a lot of them from which to choose. As I said in the last live stream, I think one of them I've been reading a lot of, again, is Bernard Caillet's autobiography, which I absolutely love. F-stop, pit stops, laughters and tears. He did it so well, the autobiography. It's 2-volume work. A lot of his photographs in there, probably all his photographs in there, and lovely text, lovely little vignettes of his life. And just before we went on air, I was reading about his 1955 season, by which time he was really gathering pace as a journalist, although he was working winters in California as a Mercedes salesman, actually, in a showroom in Sunset Boulevard, getting to know all the high rollers, as Bernard would. But when he got back, it's a classic. He said, finally I decided I'd earned enough money to buy my own car rather than have to go by train everywhere or borrow, get rides. So I decided to buy a Citroën de Chevaux, used one. And for those who don't know what a Citroën de Chevaux is, it's a classic car, absolutely classic, beautifully designed, everything worked, totally functional, not large, not luxurious, you could say in the modern sense of the word, but totally everything you need. And he drove it that year from Evian, where he lived in France on the lake, to opposite Switzerland, really, opposite Geneva, to Kristianstad in Sweden for the Swedish Grand Prix sports car race, which Mercedes dominated. Maserati were there as well. A long drive, as you can imagine, particularly through Germany. And I loved the two things I loved about that. One was he was so bored in Germany because the top speed of the Deux Chevaux was about 100 kilometers an hour. And he was so bored, no motorways then really that he was using. And so he said the biggest fun to keep the day going was whenever he was coming up to overtake a car, which he'd have to do with momentum by getting a good run out of the previous corner or whatever, he would duck down in the seat, literally lie down in the seat. And as the Citroën Deux Chevaux went past the Merc or whatever it was, the driver would look across. There'd be nobody apparently driving the Citroën. Of course, Bernard, the Citroën Deux Chevaux, brilliant thing. It had a little ventilation hatch below the windscreen, which he had open, obviously. And he could just look out through that at what he was doing. So that's how he kept himself amused. There were little functional things like that on the Deux Chevaux. And then at Kristianstad, Maserati there were no rental cars available. They didn't have any sort of cars there. And so a lot of the drivers used the Deux Chevaux, Bernard's Deux Chevaux, to learn the circuit. And when it wasn't being used, and when the race meeting started, you could remove the seats in a Deux Chevaux easily, just clip them, unclip them, and you put them down on the ground. And then you had the seats, the front and rear seats there, and you had people like Fangio, Moss, Collins, all sitting on these seats, all having lunch together, sitting on the seats from the Deux Chevaux. Why don't they do that today? Have detachable seats in the cars? Great idea. My son actually came up with a great idea the other day as well. He said, "Daddy, why don't they have garbage bags in cars or places where you can dispose of the rubbish?" Good question, actually. I've ever seen a car, ever driven a car, owned a car, which actually has a rubbish disposal area. And so, yeah, there we are. I'm just looking again. I went silent there because I was looking again. I'm so nervous about making sure everything's working here. I think it is, isn't it? I think, I shouldn't be too ambitious in saying that it's totally okay, but I think it is working. The only thing that confused me slightly, and people will sympathize with this, is that Jack, my son, they do all their homework on computers these days, don't they? Chromebooks. And I was helping him the other day, and so somehow he logged me in on my computer into his Google thing on Chrome so that we could go through the homework together, side by side, as it were, which was great. And I went to fire it up just before the live stream. And of course, it's all logged into his stuff on Chrome. I very rarely use Chrome, got to say. Sorry about that, Zach. And I had no idea how to get out of the account. It's not the same way as you do it on a normal Google account. And it's still actually got Jack's thing logo at the top, which is I'm slightly nervous, but I think I'm in my own thing now because I don't think it'd be working if it wasn't. So I'm sure before long I'll get some chat saying, "Peter, we can't hear a word you're saying," or "We can't see you," whatever. If that's the case, apologies now. What else? Yeah, Grande Prix is a word that is a title that used to be applied to races before there was such a thing as the FIA Formula One World Championship. And if it was a Grande Prix, it would be the French Grand Prix, the British Grand Prix, the German Grand Prix. But I'm not sure the Irish Grand Prix or the, some other Portuguese Grand Prix may not have been a Grande Prix. I think it was just in the eyes of the journalists involved that there was no official thing about it. But it was a word, it was a Grande Prix. It wasn't a Grand Prix, it was a Grande Prix. It was even bigger than a Grand Prix. We don't use that word anymore. But I was very impressed and pleased to see that my friend Oscar de Vries in Australia has revived that name. And those of you who actually read the descriptions below my videos, and I hope some of you do, because I always put little cryptic messages in there, or usually do anyway, like "Stand with Ukraine now more than ever." I've got a mention there to Oscar and his shaving products that he sells online in Australia. Really, I mean, he's just a hard worker, Oscar. And he used to be the publisher of F1 Racing in Australia. That's why I know him. Great car enthusiast, great racing enthusiast. He used to race himself as well. Anyway, he started, he's put together and he's worked very hard to do what'll probably be a 2 a year, maybe 4 a year, quarterly coffee table type magazine on Formula One called Grande Prix, which is nothing but nice paper, nice photographs and a bit of text. And I've been trying to help him with that when I can and how I can, but all the credit should go to Oscar for that. And here you can see the logo for it. And I've actually got a copy of it here. There you go. The first original copies of Grande Prix have just arrived by DHL. Aston Martin, take note, not Atlas. DHL, I use the official logistics partner of Formula One. And it's very nice. Yeah, it is very plush and very nice and lovely photographs. And basically it's to promote his shaving products. So do that. If you like one, go to Oscar's shaving stuff. And I think you'll find if you subscribe to his shaving thing, you get a copy of that. If not, you can buy them as well. And there is a website. I'm not sure it's actually up and running today. I think it might be tomorrow, but it's for sure it's going to be Oscar Razor. I think we'll go to oscarrazor.com.au and it'll direct you if it's not there. Oscar Razor. And that website is on my description anyway. So yeah, full marks to Oscar for doing that and best of luck. And while I'm there, a big thanks to all our partners who make this show possible, to TrackNinja, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to Jetcraft. Anything else I should talk about? I've been toying with the idea of not mentioning this or vacillating about whether I should or not. But I'm not going to get involved in the politics. I have my own opinions on everything, as we all do. But I'm increasingly astonished, with a capital A, at how like Bernie Donald Trump sounds. And often, and his methodology of doing deals and the way he puts things together is classic Bernie. It's divide and conquer, and always make the difficult party with which you're going to have to negotiate feel as if they're your buddies. That's the first golden rule. And always be disrespectful before you're going to put all the pieces together again. Classic Bernie. And Donald Trump seems to have, I don't know, Bernie, that's never been in a book, so I don't know how he did it, but he seems to be copying every move that Bernie would make in everything he does. And it all came to a head last week when somebody said, but Donald, why have you called Vladimir Zelensky a dictator? And he said exactly what Bernie would have said in that situation, which was, did I say that? I don't remember saying that. A number of times I've got up to Bernie on the grid, live TV, with the producer in my ear saying, ask Bernie why he said there'll be no more US Grand Prix at Long Beach, or whatever it is. And I find Bernie on the grid. I say, Bernie, you said last week there'll be the future of the Long Beach Grand Prix and be in doubt. Can you tell us why that would be and what the prospects are? Did I say that? I don't think I said that. That's what those two say. I don't think there are any other two people in the world like them, but Anyway, Bernie Ecclestone, his influence goes on and on and on. And if you look at the Bernie Max pairing, and how many people, even today, were convinced that Max often had moments when he was dead against Bernie and totally against what Bernie was trying to do and disagreed with him. And of course, it was complete rubbish. They were always joined at the hip. And Max never sneezed without Bernie's permission. And still people today don't get it. That's exactly how it was. And for sure it's like that with Trump today and everything he's doing. Anyway, I shouldn't get involved in politics, so I won't do it. I won't say any more about that. We can talk about Bernie, of course. That's part of motor racing, isn't it? So here we go. Let's get some questions going. I've got, let me just get this down again. 1 second, sorry. Get the browser up. There we go. First question is from Sarosh Soman, who is a regular. Thank you very much, Sarosh, for your questions. Some of you may notice that I'm doing short edits from these live streams, and I hope you don't mind if I use your question and have your name up there. I can't imagine you do if it's up there for the live stream and the video that sits on YouTube. Why would you worry about the edit? But anyway, there we go. Sarosh says, hi, Peter. Mansell's top 10 moments released by Formula One doesn't have his performance in 85 Portuguese Grand Prix listed, and there are no highlights showing his drive from the pits to finished in 5th. Really? Well, that's a good reason not to watch top 10 stuff. It's complete rubbish, isn't it? It's just the opinion of some person who's probably not well informed about what actually happened. And there's no doubt at all that drive in the 85 Portugal Grand Prix was certainly top 3 of Nigel's great Grand Prix drives. Absolutely brilliant. On a day when Ayrton Senna took all the headlines for winning his first Grand Prix in the black and gold Lotus, the Lotus Renault. What needs to be borne in mind, of course, is that Ayrton was lucky enough or clever enough or good enough to have a clear track in front of him in the whip, which is a massive advantage. Bear in mind, Nigel started from the pit lane after having a slight off on the formation, on the outlap actually, onto the grid. No, yeah, onto the grid. And he had started from the pit lane with the repairs, and he was in nothing but traffic the entire race and finished fifth. And more than that, he finished fifth in a car, Williams Honda, in which Honda had yet to get on top of the throttle lag problem. Renault well on top of it, as Nigel said, first time he drove the car. But he described the throttle response of the Honda in early 85 as basically an on-off switch. It was just full power or nothing at all. And that caught out Keke Rosberg in the race, in the other Williams Honda, had a massive shunt. And Nigel, with this ridiculous throttle response, driving through the traffic, finished fifth from the pit lane. And I asked him afterwards how he was doing so many passes, how he's able to pass so many cars in all the spray and the standing water, which was moving every lap and everything else. And he said, as Nigel would, he said, "Oh, an old trick, I just listened to the engine note of the car in front, and when he backed off, I knew that was my moment to dive down inside." Yeah, sounds easy now. So yeah, absolutely right to pick that up. I think everybody should stop doing those, because if you're going to do a top 10 of Nigel and you don't have the 85 Portuguese Grand Prix in there, you obviously don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, next one. I'm not being disparaging. I mean, it's just a ludicrous thing even to consider that. And Prani Sharma says, can Williams fight for a championship again? I'm delusional. Delusional in even thinking they might. Oh, don't write them off completely. They went quite well in the test, didn't they? I don't know. I couldn't work out from what Scarbs are saying whether that's because they're still running last year's car and didn't have to do much development and teething stuff, or whether they're genuinely super quick. I don't know. But I think they'll be there or thereabouts. I still feel very sorry for Carlos Sainz that he's got to drive for that team when he's been at Ferrari, and Ferrari are going to be having a pretty good year, I think. So that's the first thing I got to say. But having said that, in theory they've got lots and lots of money now, so no excuses about that. They've always had good facilities. They just need to know how to run them. They need to have good people. They seem to be getting good people now. They need to make no more managerial mistakes. And I see that the name of their title sponsor was Lucien or something like that. Are something to do with operational something or other. It's about 10 words to describe what they do. I don't really understand what they do, but if it is operational, I certainly hope they're capable of stopping Williams going to a Grand Prix now, a flyaway race without a spare chassis. That would be good and helpful. So, yeah, two quick drivers for sure. Both of them late breakers. Both of them turn in pretty late. I would say, actually, Albon's probably got slightly softer inputs, but I would say Sainz is a bit more precise in what he does, and he's so good at what he does now, and he's found that sweet spot that he very rarely strays over it. So he's got two excellent drivers. They've got two excellent drivers. Car will be half reasonable. Mercedes, power unit will be good. So yeah, for sure they're going to be midfield. No excuses if they're not, and they should be high midfield. I would say 50% of the time. And yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them on a podium or two this year. Wouldn't be surprised at all. They should be. If they're not, they need to be, really digging in deep and wondering what they're doing wrong. Well, managerially, I think. Aaron Lee. Hi, Peter. Did you see the pictures of Liam standing next to turns 9 and 10 watching the cars go past? It was cool to see a driver watch other drivers in person for once. Yeah, I didn't actually see that, but thanks for pointing it out. I'm not surprised. Liam Lawson is a good bloke, and he's just a racer, and he's very car control-y and just wants to get out there, just like Jack Doohan, really. And I saw George Russell was doing that as well, which is, again, no surprise. George is still very much a karter, isn't he? A good bloke, George. And so, yeah, no surprise there. It's a shame more don't do it. Franz Tost used to do it as well. Sadly, he's not around anymore. But yeah, I mean, for young guys, when they're out of the car, not to be out on the circuit watching what's going on and watching other drivers is just criminally stupid, actually, not to be doing that, because there's your opportunity. Yes, there are going to be moments when you need to be there listening to the radio. You don't have to listen to the other guy's radio for half the day, though, for Pete's sake, or even a full day. Get out there and watch what's going on. Everybody, you can learn from everything, particularly if you watch them going through 9 and 10 in Bahrain, which is still one of the best corner sequences in Formula One, in my opinion. So, to see exactly where guys like Lewis and Charles and Max go through 9, yes, you're going through 9 pretty wide because you want a nice wide approach to 10 to get the car stopped in a clean way. But how wide? You know, that much makes a huge difference going through 9, because you're talking about flat out in, I'm assuming 6th gear, maybe 7th, flat out, and you're on the marbles, and that makes a difference. And how you actually get the car when it's very, very light there, going over the brow, and then you get it stopped. There's a beautiful bit of road, and that's where, you know, the guys should be out there all watching. On that note, I was quite impressed to see that the Bahrain organisers actually were selling tickets to the test and trying to put on a bit of a show for the fans, trying to get the thing going and giving it a bit of life. And I remember, I've sat in a few F1 team meetings in my time, and I remember one of them not so long ago when Luca Montezemolo was on the scene again, Luca having a long thing about how Formula One should do much more with testing and how we lose an opportunity there to sell Formula One to the public, and testing's a great opportunity because there's so much downtime for the drivers who aren't in the car to get up on a podium and to do interviews and to be available to the public and have big screens and to make it a big thing. You know, Formula One cars testing all day, why not? Everybody said, oh no, that'll never happen, go away, poor Luca. You know, it was a good idea, I thought. And I see that Bahrain are kind of doing that. I don't know how many people actually went over the weekend. They probably didn't make money, but I think it was good, and they should be given full marks for doing that. And it just shows, you know, there is a lot of time there that the drivers who aren't in the car can be doing usefully. They can either be out there with the fans signing autographs, or they can be out on the circuit watching and learning. You know, that would be good. I'd be fascinated to know if Oscar Piastri was actually watching the way Lando goes through 9-10 and whether he thought he's doing things any differently there. Because I think Oscar's actually probably slightly better through there. But I mean, we had that discussion already, and I've put out a short video about that. But I mean, there's a good example. And also, you know, for Liam to be there watching what Max is doing, I guess, is a hugely impressive thing. He is he's a wide turn-in late breaker, like most of these young guys. Not all of them. I don't think Isaac Hadjar is, and I don't think Kimi Antonelli is. I haven't really seen enough of either to be absolutely sure about that. But most of the others are. And if they can start seeing what a guy like Max is doing in the same car, they might think, yeah, it's interesting. The other thing, just on that, I was talking to an FIA person the other day, actually, and we were talking in the context of the active aero and how it's going to work. And I wasn't talking, actually, it was a WhatsApp thing, and about how they're going to define the parts of the circuit in which it's going to be applied, in which it can be used. And it's not only the straights, it's also the corners. So it's quite a significant thing, and how they define that. And obviously it's based on where it's going to be safe. And then they're going to base the decision on data from the teams and simulations. And that was fine. And then I went away and I thought about it, and I thought, well, that's going to be difficult because the data from the teams is not detailed enough, and never will be probably, to be able to distinguish between what one driver in the team is doing with the car and what another driver is doing with the car. Now, you may say that's rubbish, Peter. Of course, you can see the throttle, you can see the accelerator, you can see this, you can see the brakes, you can see the throttle. But this is what I mean by that. And I think this will become more relevant when we do have active aero, and some drivers who are very, very good on some corners may get penalized or not. We'll reserve judgment on that down the road. But this is what I mean. And it comes out of the heading of short corners. But it's another explanation of why short corners are better, but more difficult to understand. If you're basing your data, and which you're passing on, say, to the FIA, on a point in the corner where the driver is absolutely flat on the throttle and is able to stay on the throttle, and you say, right, from that moment he's accelerating, that doesn't take into account the facts that drivers like Max, Charles and Lewis, and there will be others out there as well, maybe Antonelli if you want to include him in that, maybe maybe some others, Oscar Piastri, doesn't take into account that those drivers are more interested in extending the straight into the corner and carrying more speed to a rotation point different from a geometric apex, then not worrying at all about the rotation point, just getting the car rotated to the angle they then want for a long acceleration run out of the corner, and getting all the load out of the car, if you like, with the slow minimum speed rotation. And if you look at, say, the difference between, and I'm imagining here, if you look at the difference between Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc in the Ferraris last year, not on any given corner, but on some corners. Let's say a good example of that would be second last corner of Bahrain, that right-hander. It leads down the hill to the long straight. If you look at that corner on the telemetry, almost certainly Carlos Sainz is on the power sooner than Charles Leclerc. But in doing so, when he's accelerating from what is his apex, his rotation point, he's actually carrying more load through the car than Charles Leclerc is doing once he's rotated the car and he's got the car at a straighter angle, and he's accelerating maybe later, but he's accelerating with less lateral load through the car. And the way to measure the difference is not at that point. You measure the difference of whether Charles' system is better, I don't know, 100 meters from the exit of the corner? So he's carrying more speed then? Because Charles has accelerated with less lateral load in the car than Carlos Sainz, rather than on the edge like that, accelerating with all that load in the car. And I would be willing to bet my house that the teams don't have data that will actually illustrate that. And certainly the data that the FIA will have to use in order to decide where to put these active aero areas on the circuit will not be based on on that subtle difference. And I think that's a shame, because, and it may be to the advantage of a guy like Leclerc, it may be the disadvantage. We'll have to wait and see how they decide where they're going to put these areas. But I think they're playing with fire, to be honest, if they're starting to do that based on data. They should do it on difficult corners, nothing else. But of course they won't do that, because that might reward the better cars and make the racing even less close, or it might be more dangerous. So they won't do that. That's my fear. Anyway, it's all quite difficult to explain, but I hope you get the gist of what I'm on about. David Fredericks hunkered down in the first cyclone in Brisbane since '74. Well, good luck with that, mate. Yeah, put the old sandbags under the doors there, or by the doors, and hope for the best. Thinking of you guys there. It's terrible weather at the moment, even though we're told that global warming, no such thing as global warming. No such thing as global warming. Yeah, pouring with rain here as well, but not cyclone. David Fredericks continues. Looking forward to watching Peter while we ride it out. Oh, well, thank you very much. Lou Sequoia. Hi, Peter. Crazy question here. What would happen if two or the same car would compete, but one would have an old school stick shift against one with today's steering wheel with all the buttons? Well, you're talking to a guy that's just bought a Hyundai i20N with its 6 on the floor clutch. Beautiful, beautiful gear. Best gearbox I've ever used in my life. Just click, click, click. Beautiful. But, I still haven't got first to second absolutely perfect in terms of if I'm accelerating hard and I want that change just to be boom like that. I haven't got it quite right. There's always a slight thing. And I was saying to Jack, who was in the other seat the other day, I said, I think I've got it, which is that instead of going first to second, you go first, just pause slightly in neutral before you engage second, and then it seems to be perfect. And so far that's working. But, that's what I love about manual transmissions, that it's and a Formula One driver who almost won a Grand Prix but didn't, drove my Lotus Super 7 once, and he couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle the gear change, the heel and toe, nothing. Just couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it. I thought, wow, that's interesting. Formula One guy. So yeah, it's a totally different world, isn't it? That hand-foot coordination and feel for the clutch, and the ability to heel and toe seamlessly down through the gears, and then obviously with upshifts as well. And we've talked a lot about that. It's a wonderful thing, and I understand where you're coming from. Of course, the guy with the stuff on the wheel is going to win it easily, but I've often said, it's kind of a shame that we don't get to see how guys like Max would be if they did have to heel and toe. We know what Charles Leclerc would do. He'd blow the gearbox apart, as he did with Nicky's 74 Ferrari 312, didn't he? Or I hope it was the 74 car, not the transverse gearbox one, which would be even more disastrous. We did that in that classic Monaco. But no, we should give Charles the benefit of the doubt there and say that, well, he needs a bit more practice. But yeah, that I talked about it in the last live stream about Grand Prix drivers in road cars in the days when there was manual transmission everywhere, and how good their clutch take-up always is, and the use of revs was perfect, and the gear shift was perfect. Annoyingly so, for guys like me sitting next to them, I'd come away thinking, how do they do that? How do they do that? So natural. It's so smooth, silky smooth, everything they do. I think I've told this story before as well, looking out the window at the pouring rain. It was driving with Jody Scheckter at Silverstone Grand Prix circuit at the, the brilliant Goodyear test days they used to have there, when all the drivers were given road cars to give journalists like myself rides around the circuit. It was pouring with rain. Jody's in this ridiculous Gordini, really hot Gordini Renault thing. I guess it was an Elf deal when he was still at Tyrrell. And it was pouring with rain. Jody accelerates out and doesn't put the wipers on until he gets to Stowe. And I said, Jody, why don't you take so long to put the wipers on? He said, I didn't see it. I'm always looking far ahead. I never look at the steering, at the windscreen. That gave me an idea of how far these guys actually do look ahead. I try it quite often. I'll try to annoy everyone who's with me by not putting the wipers on until the very last minute. Shouldn't say that, of course. Sheriff of Sandervoort. Oh, come on now. Hello, Mr. Windsor. Go to Formula One YouTube. Yeah. You've been watching too much Cameron, haven't you? There you go. My mate Cameron. He's a good bloke, isn't he? I'll do another chat with him soon. I love doing chats with him. And because he's got his ear to the ground of what all the, the chattering masses are saying. And I always like to sort of pontificate from way above. Anyway, another question from the great Sheriff. What was the Buenos Aires Grand Prix like? Prost told an anecdote about how in 1980 the asphalt was dangerous and starting to melt, with Fangio asking them to drive slowly at the start. Well, that's true. Yeah, it was unbelievably hot, and it was falling apart. Not unusual in South America. Brazil, Interlagos, same thing. But yeah, it was incredibly hot that year, and it was breaking up. But the Argentine Grand Prix in general was a fabulous race because it was this incredible complex that was built in the 1950s, early 50s, with about 9 different configurations, Paque, Almirante, Brown. And it was the scene of the first ever rear engine Grand Prix car win in 1958. So it's got a massive amount of history, lovely circuit, great corner, Cordovon out the back, and also the S's after the pit straight. Amazing series of S's, really quick. 4th gear in a ground effect Williams, I remember, if you're Carlos Reutemann. So yeah, really, really good race. Great atmosphere. It was the nearest thing I've ever come across to the atmosphere of the Tasman series in Australia, and the feeling of Sunday morning with the sun shining and the newspapers and getting in the car and the smell of the picnic in the esky and driving to the track and all the people everywhere and the flags and everything. It was just the same in Buenos Aires, exactly the same feeling, and a lot more police, I suppose, when you got to the track was about the only difference. But then I usually rode to the track with Carlos, and he would be sitting there reading the paper, and I'd be driving, or somebody else, and sitting quiet, and the car would just get mobbed by people who drive into the circuit. And yeah, he never won there. He should have won there, of course. Lots of times. He should have won he could have won in 72 when he was on the pole for his first ever Grand Prix. Should have won in 74. Certainly should have won in a Williams. And he was quick in a Ferrari there too. So yeah, a really, really impressive circuit. Sadly missed by all who knew it, particularly Ken Tyrrell, who said that the Sheraton in Buenos Aires was his all-time favorite hotel on the entire Grand Prix calendar. Waking up every morning and looking at the masts of the training ships, the yachts, inevitably were outside, the poolware outside, the smell of the air conditioning, a coffee shop. I think I've told that James Hunt coffee shop story, so I won't tell that one again. But I do remember when the Ligiers were super quick in '79 and were dominating those first few races. I do remember bumping into Gerard Ducourage and Jacques Lafitte at about 8 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning when I was going off, or bags packed, to get my flight back to London, and they were coming back into the hotel. I do remember that, going up the fire escape too for some reason. From the lobby, it went straight to the fire escape. They're probably embarrassed to be going up in the lift, I suppose. Anyway, we won't go any further on that one. Georges Menares Harris. Hi, Peter. I think the harassment accusations against Horner had a lot to do with this booing. See you in Chile in September for the BOBO rally. Yeah, I love that BOBO rally. Chile, watched it all live on TV, Rally TV last year, and I certainly will be again. Sadly, I don't think we'll be in Chile. I'd love to be there, though. What a great event that was, with all the fog coming into play as well, and how good Terry Neuville was in the fog. Just outstanding. Yeah, I don't know. That whole, but people, harassment accusations against Horner, as you phrase it, I'm sure you're probably right, but he's not the only guy in Formula One who's perhaps done something done something wrong. I mean, I don't remember all that booing of Tolman when Alex Hawkridge ran into all his problems, or the Arrows team being booed every time they came on the track because they'd been convicted of stealing the drawings from Shadow. We live with these things. They happen. The whole Colin Chapman thing, Ferrari, all those guys, you're telling me they're all super clean, super honest, super perfect people. Nobody's perfect, particularly in Formula One. So, if you want to, and don't say to me, please, oh, well, it's different times today. It's not different today. There's just as much corruption today as ever. So sadly, I'd say don't judge, because it will judge, or make sure when you look yourself in the mirror in the morning that you're absolutely totally happy with everything you've ever done in your life and are going to do that day before you judge anybody else, would be my reaction to that. We've got a super chat here from Sammy28. Hi, Peter. Looked like Kimi and Lewis were driving much longer corners throughout testing. Wide entries, long corners. Keen to hear your thoughts. You know what? I think you're absolutely right. I watched a bit of Lewis and I thought, what is he doing? And he wasn't really doing it, was he? He was just driving normal corners. I wonder whether he just thinks, well, that's the only way I'm going to drive now. I've done it for so long, the last 2 or 3 years at Merck. I've got to do that. But I think we'll see some changes as it develops. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I noticed the same thing. I didn't actually watch Kimi, so I can't say. But if Kimi's doing that too, then that could well be a sign that they've told him to look at George Russell's telemetry and copy George, which I think will be a massive mistake, just as I think it's a mistake if Oscar's trying to drive like Lando now. And, they're probably saying to him, well, all that incident at Monza when you're on the soft tyres, you're locked up, you brake too much too late, you need to get your act together. But the way to do that isn't to drive like George Russell, because he's not a George Russell driver, and I hope they're not doing it. But anyway, going back to Lewis, it was a bit of a conundrum to me, that. And I'm just basically saying to myself, well, it was only testing, so we'll, reserve judgment, I think, until we see what Lewis actually does in the car when he's right on the limit. But there's an argument. I can kind of understand that if Lewis is trying to find his way into the Ferrari, and he's driven like that more or less for the last 2 years against his better instincts, that he's going to do that in the first day or two in the Ferrari, is he not? Before he really starts to think, right, I can be Lewis Hamilton again. He's just going to see what the direct comparison's like. He's going to still do what he's done, and then he's going to progress from there. If he doesn't, I'll be shocked. And we'll talk about that from the Australian Grand Prix onwards. But yeah, very strange. Thanks for that question. Sheriff of Sound of Oats. Secondly, of all the new rookies arriving, who do you think has the best chance of beating his teammate this year? I think Yuki is really going to have to work hard to beat Isaac. Yeah. I think you're right. I think Isaac will do very well. And I think is Oliver Berman a rookie? I don't know. He's probably not. I think he'll probably go quite well against Ocon. Yeah, I would go along with that. I don't think Liam's going to take it to Max, as it were. It depends what you mean by that. I think Liam could win a Grand Prix this year, but he may not. I don't think he'll ever upstage Max Verstappen, but I think he could win a Grand Prix. But yeah, I think Isaac looks good, and Kimi will be, well, depends what we were just saying. You know, if Kimi starts to try to drive like George, I think he'll be lost. Pratik Barol, Peter, do you know why Niels Wittig stepped down as the race director, and how do you think the Rui Marquez is faring? Well, I've asked a few people I know in the know, and it all comes under the heading of, well, you know, a lot of good people leave the FIA right now. And I can't really say more than that, because I don't know enough about the FIA detail day-to-day running to be more critical than that, or to say more than that. All I would say is that there is a lot of criticism of the current FIA president, but they're all difficult people doing difficult things, and they all have their own idiosyncrasies. It's never been any different. Even Jean Todt, obviously Jean-Marie Balestre, you know, and so it goes on. And I think, and Max, obviously. So, you know, he's no different from any of those guys. I mean, what do you expect if you've got a system where every country has an equal vote, and it's quite easy for somebody standing for election to go around the world and get the votes of all these minor countries and give them something in return? The United States and, you know, has the same one vote as the Ivory Coast. So if that's the system you've got, that's what you're going to have. And it takes me back to my point about Bernie and breaking down and becoming mates with your biggest enemy before you're doing the deal. It's exactly what he did with Balestre in 81. You know, in the build-up to the signing of that Concord Agreement in 1981, with the FISA-FOCA war, the thing they were trying to solve, Balestre and Bernie were best mates. Oh, yeah, you know, he's not a bad guy. You know, he's quite a funny bloke, really. And so that's how it happened. Balestre thought, oh, well, I quite like this Bernie bandwagon now. You know, probably all make a bit more money, and, yeah, we'll go along with it. And that's how it happened. Of course, once it happened, Balestre was, yeah, he was there, but he was just a figurehead, didn't do much, did he? And it's the same with all presidents. They all have their thinking, well, I'm going to leave my mark by doing this or that. Fine, you know, that's great. But if you want a genuine president, you've got to have a completely different voting system. And that's why a lot of people leave, because obviously at the moment, a lot of people aren't comfortable with the way the FIA is being run. Pratik Barol again, will we see more personnel? Well, we've seen a lot already. Whether we see any more from the FIA this year, I don't know, probably. Do you know how the new circuit in Madrid is coming along? I believe there's a push from the Science family as well. Well, the Science family very much based in Madrid. I guess they'd love to see that happen. And I saw the other day that there was something had been announced by Madrid. It was something to do with the big conference center there, where the F1 exhibition was. That, you know, that's all being developed, and there's a lot of changes going on in the prelude to the Grand Prix. But then I saw simultaneously, virtually a week later, Barcelona putting out an announcement saying they're doing a new technology center at Barcelona, and it's going to be the center hub of technology, blah, blah, blah. So there's obviously quite a big drama going on between Barcelona and Madrid. We're going to stay right out of it where we are in Spain, let them get on with that one. But those I've spoken to about it, who kind of know a bit more than I do, well, a lot more, say that the money that Madrid have to raise to make this happen is going to be horrendous. So whether or not, I think that's going to be the biggest problem ultimately, like all things in Formula One. Gerard Crabb, US trade war effect on Formula One in US and sponsors. Well, you know, we said we shouldn't bring politics into it, and I kind of briefly touched on politics. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible, isn't it? Absolutely ludicrous. Why do we listen to these economists? What would they know about it? Why do we listen to these Wall Street specialists? What do they know about it? Tariffs. You know, tariffs for me are under the same heading as Brexit. You know, it's just like, are they serious? And obviously it will have an effect. How can it not have an effect? It'll have a knock-on effect on the rest of the world. And Europe will probably be getting its fair share of tariffs pretty soon from the US. And then there'll be, you know, tit for tat. And a lot of Europeans have been saying, oh, well, you don't really care what happens in America because it doesn't affect us. Well, this is where it's going to affect you big time. I think, you know, if Ukraine doesn't go the way it should, that could affect you too. Musa Nguni, if your internet connection is on fiber optic, there's also nothing to worry about. Well, that's right. I am on fiber optic. And that's why I've done that. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, good point. You don't have to worry about the wind and the rain anymore, do you, in theory? Although the previous system I was on was also fiber optic, but guess what? It went to a terminus or terminal somewhere, which wasn't fiber optic, and it was still subject to rain and wind. So don't just assume because it's got the old FO logo or whatever it is, that it is going to be bulletproof. You've really got to see where it ultimately finally goes. But I've been told by my mate Kevin that this is fiber optic the whole way. And it is quick. It's good. It's really nice. Pratik Burrell, when do you think we'll hear more about the 11th team? Any prospects for a 12th team as well? Well, I think isn't it pretty likely now that the whole Andretti Cadillac thing is going to happen, and they will be the 11th team in 26. That's what I understood. I hadn't seen the official announcement, but I'm pretty sure that's happening now. There've been, obviously, money's been spread around the table, and a few other bits and things have happened. Yeah, there should be 12 teams, as you correctly say, and it's, well, even more than that. You know, we used to have 26 cars on the grid, didn't we? So, I don't know. It's a huge thing, isn't it, to do a Formula One team, he says, with experience, because you've got to have not only the money either to buy an existing team or start a new team, you've got to be able to guarantee the money for running it for 3 years or something like that. So it's absolutely crazy. Huncho, did you see the cricket? No, I didn't this time. Terrible. I'll try and catch up on what happened, but thanks very much for the heads up. I was a bit focused on the golf at the weekend, to be honest, and what else was I focused on? Oh, yeah, doing some stuff with the car as well. Lotus Elan. Wolf Hunter 777. What do you think of Alex Dunn in Formula 2 this season? Yeah, interesting thing, isn't he? He's McLaren, I think, isn't he? Pretty good, isn't he? He's quick. So many quick guys, but I have been watching him, and he is good. So, yeah. I was looking through the WEC results from, was it Bahrain? The number of quick F2 drivers that never got the chance to race F1 who are now in WEC is sad, and most of them doing a great job getting the car where it should be in qualifying, or like Habsburg, taking the car up to P3 or something in the first 5 laps, and then you have to hand it over to the amateur driver, and it crashes and does something, and then to me that's not racing, and that's why I'm still yet to be excited about it all, because because Formula One has sucked all the money out of the rest of motorsport, the only way for WEC to survive, or the only way for Formula 3 and Formula 2 to survive, is the rich parents of kids to pay all the bills. And then the only way for WEC to survive is if you do it with rich amateurs. It's very sad, isn't it? Terrible. Speaking of which, I was also reading in Bernard's book, nothing to do with amateurs really, but we don't give Pierre Levesque enough credit. He's the guy, sadly, who lost his life in that 55 Le Mans disaster, driving the Mercedes that went into the crowd when Lance Macklin moved over on him as they were coming into the pit, as he was making room for, or braking to avoid, Mike Hawthorne's Jaguar, and Lance Macklin moved to the left, hit Pierre Levesque's Mercedes, which was flat out on the straight, and it barrel rolled into the crowd, or exploded, and the gearbox and the axles and the engine went into the crowd. Terrible thing, over 80 people killed. And anyway, Pierre Levesque is kind of lost in all of that, but he was a quick driver, Pierre Levesque, and we shouldn't ever forget that. He was talented, and he nearly won Le Mans a couple of years before, single-handed drive. Brilliant. And anyway, I mention all that because we were talking about new cars and talking with Scarbs about, the not really much going on with the new cars in Bahrain. And in Bernard's book, I'd completely forgotten that at the end of 55, when Mercedes announced that they were going to pull out of not only Formula One, but also sports car racing, that they had a function in Stuttgart, to which all the drivers were invited, and some journalists, obviously, including Bernard. And the pictures from Bernard, everybody's very happy and smiling and relaxed. But even more interestingly, instead of unveiling the car, they veil the car. And Fangio and a few others have got this sheet, and they actually put it on top of the Mercedes to close the era, not to reveal the new car, if you see what I mean. I'd completely forgotten. I think I knew that, but I'd forgotten that they'd done that. What an amazing thing, eh? And of course, Dundrod that year, which was late in the year, 3 drivers were killed in that race as well, sports car race. I suppose you could say, well, we had lots of amateur drivers then. Yeah, but we didn't have amateur drivers ensuring that was the only way that the factory teams could go racing, if you see what I mean. And not all the factory teams, but I mean, they're the rules, aren't they? You got to have these guys. So difficult. John Dawson, Beaumont Christian. Hi, Peter. At the F1 exhibition in London, where the helmets, replicas, or originals, what displays change based on the venue? No, they are all originals, and they are, I'd say 80, 90% of them were owned by one collector. Lovely guy. And big thanks to him. So yeah, they're all originals. I think he probably bought some of them from Gert Kramer's estate, because Gert, as you recall, was the Mercedes man on the ground to sell, had the incredibly difficult job of having to sell Mercedes road cars to Grand Prix drivers with a 20% discount. No takers for that. That was his job. He used to go to every Grand Prix. Anyway, the journalist, I think, got 15%, something like that. So he had a great guy. I loved Gert. Everything was, perfect for Gert. He was the classic Merc German. And he had this every time he sold a car to a Grand Prix driver, because, of course, you will give me your helmet as part of the payment. And so he had all these helmets. And I went to his house once. Unbelievable helmet collection. And I think that's probably where they ended up with the gentleman that we worked with for the exhibition. Obviously going to different venues, different geographies, different regions, more emphasis on, when we go to Australia, there'll be more emphasis on Jack Brabham, Alan Jones, Mark Webber, so forth. When we go to Amsterdam, obviously more on the Dutch side of things with Max. And then equally, when we go to South America, there'll be a lot of, Montoya, Reutemann, Fangio, Massa, Barrichello, whatever you want. So yeah, there's going to be changes of emphasis, but the basic thrust of what the exhibition is all about will remain the same. Would you do Astor Diamond? Would you do a Jetcraft hat giveaway? Thank you very much. I actually talked to my guys at Jetcraft the other day, saying, what about some merch? We seem to be getting a bit of interest going. And they said, oh, well, we don't. It's the first time anybody's ever asked us for that. We've done your stuff, Peter, but, do you think there's a market for it? I said, well, I think there probably is. We are actually, I don't know if I should say this in advance, famous last words, but we are looking pretty shortly, my manager tells me, at opening up a big Shopify element on our YouTube channel, where in theory, when you go to it, it's something like products or whatever in the description. You go there and you see all these different things. And I'm thinking in my head, quite a lot of mates can sell their stuff through here. Artwork, Oscars, razors, things like that. And maybe Jetcraft caps as well. Who knows? We'll see. Anyway, watch this space. Hasn't happened yet. Like all these things seems to take us forever. Dillstar22 says hello. Hello. Trisha, RIP, Jean. Oh, Jean, yeah, Jean Hackman. Yeah, absolutely, Trisha. Thank you for that. Yeah, very sad. And I always remember, treasure that day I had with him in London, Hyde Park. Overcoats. Cold. Broderick, big up. I think that's a hello, is it? Max Flashart, public transport is real. What's that mean? But more reliable than French vehicles. Yeah, I think that's probably right. The other thing that came through in the Bernard Caillet thing about the driving the Citroën de Chevaux to Kristianstad was that the Maseratis came by train. What do you think about that? Wouldn't it be brilliant if I don't know, whatever, Monaco, all the Formula One cars are going to go to Monaco on the Orient Express. That'd be great. I think they still have the Orient Express, don't they? Somewhere. Dillstar22, do you think there will be big gaps between top teams and midfield teams? No, I don't think there will. I think, as Scarbs said, and I've kind of tried to say as well, but not as eloquently as Scarbs, I think there will be, at any given race, there will be one or two of the midfield teams that get it almost right from here on in. And they won't necessarily be the teams that get it right at the next race. I'm talking the midfield teams now. But I think there's enough midfield teams, like about 5, for one of them or two to get it right every race. So I think the top 3 or 4 teams, in theory, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull, not necessarily in that order, will always have a couple of midfield teams giving him a hard time into Q3 and in the first 20 laps of a race, or indeed into the first corner. So there you go. They do. It is the net behind your seat. That's relevant to another conversation, I think. The net behind my seat. Okay. Oh yeah, right. I think I got that. You have to switch accounts. Do I? And you can switch between machines, but remember to log out after, otherwise kids will... Yeah, okay. Well, that's what happened. Thank you, Jack Windsor. He doesn't understand it either, really, but anyway. Yeah, I hope it's all working. It's all I can say. All that. So there you go. I do a nice work, by the way. Thank you very much. Sheriff has said, Flavio Briatore is pushing for the return of the French Grand Prix. Quite right. But he said, regarding a street race in Paris, it's a shame that we can't get back to classic French tracks like Manicourt. Yep, he's right on both counts. I'd love to see a French Grand Prix. I don't mind Ricard. I like Ricard. A bit too many barbed wire fences this time round, I thought, compared with how it used to be. Get rid of all those. And the traffic was horrendous, but sort all that out. And Ricard's brilliant. And make sure I've got a nice hotel down at the Ile Rousse there in Bandol, and then everything's perfect. And then, yeah, but Manicourt, great circuit. Lovely circuit. But if we're talking great Grand Prix circuits, why don't we go back to Reims, rebuilt Reims, or Rouen, even better. Yeah. Dijon. Max Flashart, DHL, UPS, discuss. Well, isn't it DHL Atlas, discuss? Isn't it that? Well, yeah, you make a good point with UPS, I suppose, and Ferrari, but I just felt the wording, you know, new global logistics supplier was no reference to DHL. Ferrari don't do that, as far as I'm aware. That's the difference. Old Greg. Sheriff of Sound of Vote. I instantly, he's talking to Sheriff of Sound of Vote now. I instantly thought of Manicourt when I read French Grand Prix. Proper roller coaster of a track. I really dislike the way Formula One is choosing the street circuit track route. And I agree with you. And there's been some great Grand Prix circuits in France. And, you know, what about Jimmy Murphy winning the, what was it, 35 French Grand Prix at Le Mans on those dusty roads? Yeah, for a long time, French Grand Prix racetracks have been memorable. And it's a great Grand Prix. You know, we should have it. It is the most important Grand Prix, you could argue, in that it is in France and that the FIA is based in France. And they've been, France was the prime mover of road courses post-war. That's where motor racing restarted in France, in Paris, in the Bois de Boulogne, I think. Jean-Pierre Vimille, I think Louis Rosier. I think that's when it all kicked in, because public roads were not usable in England, and France got it together. So they deserve to have a French Grand Prix. Absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. Witty Goose 341. How do you analyse Lewis's driving so far relative to Mercedes ground effect cars? Well, as I say, you know, I think he definitely in the last 2 or 3 years, 2 years, I think, no, 2.5 years, has been trying to brake in a straight line more and get into the corner a little bit later, so that he at least knows what the car is doing and he's on top of it. He doesn't want to rely on a car that's changing almost lap to lap in terms of bouncing and tire deg with early turn in and slow speed mid-corner rotation that he has, that is his hallmark. And he seemed to be driving in that sort of late wide way in Bahrain in the test as well. But as I said earlier, I think that could well be just back-to-backing and also tiptoeing into the new Ferrari. We'll see when we get to Melbourne. Having said all of that, you know, don't assume that every corner is going to show up a difference between a driver like Max and a driver like, say, Carlos Sainz in terms of the way they go in and they come out in the rotation. Not every corner lends itself to anything different other than doing a line lock way for this corner being designed. And that's a little bit going back to, you know, the current breed of new Grand Prix circuits, very much like that. There's not much Max Verstappen can do around Jeddah that Carlos Sainz can't do. Very little. He can be a little bit softer maybe with his inputs, and that's about it under heavy braking. But then tyres and tyre wear comes into it much more than anything else these days on that. But some circuits do have great corners, and on those corners, it'll be interesting to see if Lewis does go back to being the Lewis we used to see in his great Mercedes and McLaren days. There or thereabouts. Please, bro, Formula One is my escape from Trump. Don't mix him into the mess. Yeah, well, that's why I touched on it very lightly. The main thrust of what I was saying was how Bernie's influence, obviously, is well beyond that of Formula One. I mean, now, look how many people are emulating the way he used to do business and does business these days, probably. Old Greg says every new circuit. Max Flashart says MBS needs to go. Well, everybody expressing their opinion here. Portuguese FM. Is the fight between McLaren and Ferrari at the start of the year? Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are saying how well McLaren are going to go. It didn't actually go that well in the test, did they? But it doesn't mean anything. It just shows that the testing is all about, what the team is doing with the fuel loads and the bits they're running on the car and how they're running the test. So we couldn't remember. McLaren obviously going to be quick. I wouldn't have said, based on what we saw, that Ferrari are more likely to be ahead of Red Bull and Mercedes than people are saying at the moment. They look pretty good, but I thought Red Bull looked pretty good too. And I thought Mercedes looked pretty good too. So it's going to be pretty close to those three. I'm not saying at the moment I think Ferrari have the jump on Red Bull and Mercedes. Max Flashart says, monetize everything, Peter. Really? Isn't money ruin everything? Do it just to help mates. Isn't that the way we should be doing it? But thank you for that. Since Ferrari is usually better in the heat, is what you're saying. Yeah, maybe. All that intercooler development stuff on the Red Bull, I can't imagine that this stage into this formula that any of them are going to have problems in heat or be better than one another in heat or altitude, are they? I don't know. Max Flashart, Peter Windsor, you might end up as FIA president. Well, that's very kind. If I was going to, I'd need to spend a lot of time, do a lot of legwork all over the world, talking to all those minor countries and getting their votes. Not sure I have the energy for that these days. Marky Lee, how's Rob Wilson's health? Thank you for asking. Marky I spoke to him the other day and he's definitely getting better. I'd still 2 steps forward, 1 back. He had a big episode over Christmas and his life's going to be a bit different from here on in, but I think he's going to get better on a graph like this. I hope he is. And he's back home and had a good chat about really important things like the shade of blue of Red Dawson's Brabham. Was it the same as Frank Madich's blue, or how quick was Paul Fay compared with Jimmy Palmer? All the stuff that you talk about with Rob. And yeah, he was overwhelmed the number of drivers and people that had been in touch with him. But he's still got his old Nokia. So yeah, I mean, that side of him's still exactly the same. Sort of 9-year-old Nokia. No, more than that, 19-year-old Nokia. So that's good. Max says he'd vote for that. I think that's me president. Well, I still think Ari Vatanen would be a good president. I don't know why Bernie was so against that and was so pro. Well, I can imagine why he was so pro Todd, but I think Ari Vatanen would have been a very, very good president. We certainly need somebody who can do something to help rallying along as well, because it's so important, rallying. Very important. Real cars. Look like the real cars that you and I drive on the road. That's what I love about them. Next rally is what? Rally of Kenya. That's going to be good. You go from Sweden, ice and snow and cold, to Kenya. Wow, that's what rallying is all about, isn't it? Brilliant. Been watching some vids recently of Sandro Manari and the Alitalia Stratos. Wow. That's all I can say. Well, I think they're a couple of mil now. I think maybe 10 mil or something, those Stratum. Old Greg, hi Peter, what are the odds of Kyle Army returning? Do you think Formula One will ever bring another traditional circuit to the calendar? It always seems to be street tracks now. Yeah. Well, of course, Liberty aren't going to own Formula One forever. And I suppose when they decide they don't want Formula One, some other new owner may take it over and say, no, I want to go back to all the classic circuits and I want to adopt Peter Windsor's idea of building renditions of the great circuits in the desert in Nevada. Great idea. Let's do that. Get rid of all these stupid DRS spectaculars. Unlikely to happen, of course. Possible. That's my solution. Let's find somebody who is going to build a Nürburgring or a Rouen or a Clermont-Ferrand, another great French circuit in the desert in Nevada, where there's lots of space and runoff area, that have them actually the same with the same elevations. Odds of Kyalami, more than they were 8 years ago, I would say. In the Liberty, this FIA era, I think there's more interest in trying to get Kyalami back on the calendar for social reasons. Also because my mate Dieter Renken is at the FIA now, and he's South African and would love to see the race happen. So if there's any chance, he'll be feeding that info to the president and trying to get him to make it happen. But I guess ultimately it's always going to be about money. And if they don't have the money to put on the race, I don't know what it is these days, but they've probably got to guarantee it for at least 3 years. And to update the circuit, have the circuit, is probably going to cost, I don't know, 300 million plus, I don't know, F1's appearance fee, travel, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be what, another, I don't know, 60 per year, that sort of number. So yeah, it's a lot of money. And for not much return, that's the bottom line, because still it's very difficult for race promoters to make money. Most of the circuits we have on the calendar are all underwritten by governments, and the money's kind of written off as a tourist thing or some other part of the balance sheet. Actually, in terms of a sporting event that makes money because it fulfills all the rules and obliges by all the rules of other big sporting events, Formula One will never do that, because a promoter does not own the rights to television, to travel, to hospitality, to circuit signage, to the title of the race. All that belongs to Formula One. So there's not much left for whoever it is in South Africa who would put up the money to make money from. Just grandstand seat sales, and that's about it. So there you go. William Palfreyman says, Peter, enjoy your stuff, a breath of realistic fresh air amongst all the clickbait. Well, thank you very much. I just do this because, you know, I love it. Well, I love interfacing with good people and equally talking about the sport that we all kind of love, I think, don't we? Hill Arimba. Hi, Peter. Hope you and your family, including Dexter, are doing well. Yeah, Dexter's down here, aren't you, Dex? There he is. How you doing? He's great. He's on the carpet here, listening to every word with bated breath because he's not panting. Yeah, he's great. Concerning the upcoming World Rally hosted in Kenya in weeks, will you attend? No, I won't be attending, but I'll be watching it, absolutely watching it. And what an event that is. It seems as if half the stages are on sort of the edge of prairie land, and it's just dust and mud, and the rest of it is on unbelievably rocky roads with, you know, blind brows and stuff. So you got everything there. I don't know. So what are we doing? In Nick THKS, Nick's. Hi, sorry if this is a stupid question, but I was watching old seasons that predate me, and Kimi in 05 genuinely was terrifying on track. Was there ever a driver you thought was terrifying? You think he was terrifying in that he was so quick, you mean? Or I think that's probably what you mean. I mean, Kimi was absolutely svelte with his inputs and with his ability to rotate the car differently, but perfectly, virtually every corner, every lap. Went away after a while, that talent, but there was a period when he was just sublime, and yeah, he was super, super quick. I never saw him as terrifying. And if I think about terrifying drivers, I mean, certainly I wouldn't have said Gilles Villeneuve was terrifying. You certainly ran for cover when he was coming. You made sure that you were the right side of the barrier, as it were, or, you know, you're in behind the strongest part of the barrier. I mean, if I think about when I've been terrified watching drivers, I suppose watching Nicky and Beltoise and Clay in the 73 BRMs and John Watson in the Surtees, all on Firestones, interestingly. Surtees was always a pretty terrifying car to watch, very understeery, and the BRM was understeery, flick oversteery. We're talking the BRM P160B. And those cars were terrifying to watch because they were they looked undrivable, really. I mean, I have to say, Nicky in the 721X March as well was pretty terrifying because that thing had a very low polar moment of inertia, and it was just flick everywhere. Nigel in the what was it? This must have been the 83 active Lotus was always white knuckle, because you never knew if that thing was going to be on the ground or not. If the suspension was going to collapse or not. So that was worrying. I think when, if I think about 75, when there was that big tire war between Goodyear and Firestone, trying to build lighter and lighter tires, and they're all going to two-ply tires. Of course, you couldn't see that with the cars in the garage, but you knew that, and you knew they were going out on these two-ply tires, very, very high loads, very wide tires in the heat, and you just, you were petrified of tire failures. I was anyway. I suppose that's what I was always thinking about with the BRMs and the Surtees. The left front was always a very, very fragile point of the car. But in terms of a driver being terrifying, not really. No. They're all, you make allowances for some drivers doing what they do, I suppose. I mean, Andrea de Cesaris, yeah, maybe. It's a bit unpredictable. You never really knew what was going to happen next with Andrea. So, yeah, I guess he was a bit terrifying. But as Sterling Moss always said, any driver that relies on bravery to be quick shouldn't be in a Grand Prix car, because driving a Grand Prix car well is not about being brave. It's about anticipation, touch, feel, skill, to summarize that, reflexes. None of it is bravery. It is knowing what you can do with the car as you can feel it and touching the surface of the road. And Nigel often talks about bravery, and I think Nigel likes to think and does think that he was a brave driver amongst drivers who are perhaps not so brave. But if you want my opinion on that, and I know Nigel really well, and I knew him throughout his career, Nigel wasn't brave. He just knew what the car could do, and he did it, and he did it in the best way possible. And it was that feel that enabled him to go over that slight edge that maybe Riccardo Patrese could not do. It wasn't bravery. It was feel. And Gilles Villeneuve was all about feel. All about feel. Mario Pereira says, how likely is it for Lewis to win a Drivers' Championship this year? Well, as I've said before, I don't think it's that likely, because if the Ferrari is a good enough car to win a World Championship, it's going to have to be very consistent. Maybe you could miss maybe 3 races out of the whole bunch. It's going to have to be consistent over all those others and score regularly good points and win a lot of races. And if that's going to happen, I don't see Lewis beating Charles over a season. I see him winning Grand Prix, absolutely for sure, but I don't see him beating Charles, because Charles got so much Ferrari road dust, and he's so good anyway. He's not as if he's, just part of the wallpaper. So I think that's my main feeling about why Lewis wouldn't win a World Championship this year. But I think he'll be quick. I think he'll win Grand Prix. And of course, if Charles makes a series of mistakes, which he's quite capable of doing, I hope he doesn't, but for his sake, but he is capable of that. We've seen that in the past. Then obviously there's a door open there for Lewis to do it. No question about it. But assuming Charles, all bets, being Charles, being the driver that he should be, and we know he can be, if there's a championship to be won by Ferrari, I think he'll be the guy that'll win it. Emu Warrior, g'day from Melbourne, Australia. G'day, mate. Hope the weather's a bit better with you there than it is up in Brisbane, but good to hear from you. The F1 world will soon be descending upon you, so get ready for that. Malu. Hi, Peter. Do you think Max can pull it off? By which you mean the World Championship? I think he can. Yeah, I do. I think, Red Bull don't seem to have done anything too radical to the car, do they? And it wasn't that far off. It was just inconsistent second half of the year. It was quick periodically, obviously very good in the wet, but in the hands of Max. But equally, it was not bad in others. And hopefully where it's not bad, it's now much better. You'd imagine it would be, knowing Red Bull. I mean, Scarbs makes the point that they've gone to these different intercoolers because they're cheaper to run or make or whatever, and it's part of the budget thing, and they're putting everything they can into the 26 car, and they're only going to focus on the Drivers' Championship. That, yeah, if they're doing that, that's quite clever if they can pull that off. I mean, to me, that's almost like playing with fire, because you just try to win every Grand Prix. You start trying to think too much about it. Oh, well, you know, we're really going for the constructors, we'll go for the drivers, and not really going to try and get on the pole. We'll try and qualify second because the inside run into the first corner. You know, as soon as you start getting down to details like that, it always goes wrong, in my opinion. Well, usually does. You know, you just try and win every race and get on with it. And I think that's what Max will do. I mean, the bottom line is Max is a very good racing driver, and the team is still very, very good, and the car will be very good. Probably won't be as good as the McLaren still, but, you know, you need Max racking up some good podiums in the first couple of races, and he's in relatively good shape to win a championship. Especially, as I say, everybody's just assuming that, I guess they're assuming Lando Norris is going to be the guy scoring all the points for McLaren. Well, I don't think that's the case. I think Oscar Piastri is going to be quite capable of outscoring Lando on any given weekend. May not ever a championship, but he's certainly not going to help Lando's points scoring ability, because he's going to be taking points from him. Another, I know we've done that. That was the super chat we've now reached. John Dawson Beaumont Christian. Are you convinced by Vowles as a team principal? He seems to get an easy ride from the media and London crowds, despite his mistakes last year, spare chassis, etc. Yeah, and a few other things. Not that convinced, actually, because it's, I don't know. I speak from a very biased side now. I think he probably does a very, very good job in terms of a job description of doing a good job as a 2025 team principal. And he ticks all the boxes. But I don't know. I was at Williams last year, as I said, you know, with Nigel, we were doing this event, and I just found the whole lack of feel for the heritage of Williams to be absolutely astonishing, especially for Nigel. I mean, I was nothing there really, but I mean, talk about Nigel, and there wasn't much feel for him and what he'd done and how that embraced what Williams have today. And I don't know, I don't want to say too much more, because there's not much point. If you haven't got something good to say, don't say it at all. So I'm not going to say much about it really. I just don't have a feel for it at the moment. It just seems wrong that, you know, guys like Johnny Williams, for example, Frank's eldest son, isn't a part of Williams in terms of at least projecting their heritage and what they do well, and what they've done well in the past. I mean, Johnny is probably the most articulate and knowledgeable Williams person on the planet Earth. And they have no interest in him whatsoever. I find that astonishing. It's like Enzo Ferrari not wanting Piero Lardi to be a part of Ferraris, you know, and he did, of course. You know, why wouldn't they want Johnny Williams there? Why wouldn't they want Nigel there? Why have they got Jenson Button as an ambassador when you can have Nigel Mansell? It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, Jenson's, with respect, his great Grand Prix life was not at Williams. He had a great career in other ways, and he was a very good racing driver in many ways. But Williams, and yet it's Button and not Nigel Mansell. Where's the logic in that? It's probably not James's decision, but I just find that whole thing so odd, really. Florina, hi Peter. I know it's still early, but from what you've seen, do you agree that McLaren are the fastest and Mercedes maybe second? Well, Florina, as I say, I think we can safely assume that McLaren won't have lost their position over the winter. But as I said before, for me, it's still very close between Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull in terms of, and as I said about the midfield teams, on any given weekend, one or two of them are going to be pretty near the front. I think on any given weekend, it's going to be Mercedes, Red Bull or Ferrari that are very near McLaren. One of those three out of Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes are going to get it more or less right. McLaren, in theory, will get it right every race, and that's, you know, obviously what they're planning on, but it's very close. And right now you could maybe say Ferrari, but other people are saying Ferrari. You're predicting Mercedes or suggesting Mercedes. I'm saying don't count Red Bull out, you know. Max Pashot says, I think Lawson earned some respect with his fighting on track here. Yeah, he did. Well, I hope he earned respect from his fighting in Formula 2 and Formula 3 as well. I mean, he's been a fighter all his life. not just in Formula One. That is who he is. He's never been anything but that. He's very, very good, Liam Lawson. And he says even Kevin Magnussen gave him racing room. Well, yeah, that's quite something, isn't it? You know, Kevin Magnussen. What are we doing here? Marlita says, hi, Peter. Do you think Mag and RB and... I can't see the rest of the question, so I can't really answer that one, I'm afraid. Sorry. Then back to Max Pashard. Is it a push to deploy, like Super Formula type system? I don't think it is, but I may be wrong. And we didn't talk about that. I think it's it's just active aero, isn't it? And you can flatten the wing. The driver can do it when he wants within a certain area. But the key is that it's also corners and not just the straight. If that makes sense. That's why I say it's all going to be quite complicated. Really. Von Pink Art. Hi, Peter. Gary from South Africa. I've never heard you speak of Von Trips. How good was he? Short or long corners? Well, yeah, big fan of the Count Berg Von Trips as well. What a dude he was, if that's the right word. We should never, ever discount his win at Aintree 61 in conditions a bit like we have here in Spain at the moment. Wet race from start to finish, and he just dominated it in the Sharknose Ferrari. One of the great... I mean, people talk about Ayrton's win in Donington in 93. Well, was it better than Von Trips' Aintree 61? Probably not. I mean, it was as good, but that Von Trips win in the wet was just superb. And that, you know, showed how good he was, didn't it? You can't be that good in the wet against drivers like Phil Hill and Richie Ginther and the other Ferraris, and obviously Sterling, without being absolutely at the top of your game. So... lovely guy, very very well educated, obviously, very what's the right word? Very down to earth. Loved his racing. Used to film a lot of what he was doing on the road. He had a cine camera long before people really knew what they were, and he used to film other drivers on the road when they were traveling from race to race in the paddock area. He had the deer stalker, spoke many languages, and was quick in everything. A massive shunt. I think it was a 60 Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Massive shunt that he's lucky to get away with, or maybe 59. Oh, can't remember that one, but it was definitely, I think it was Curva Grande, big shunt. And then of course he had the shunt at Monza in 61, which tragically, you know, he died and 15 spectators, and he lost the World Championship as a result. Now, Phil Hill always felt that he wasn't given enough recognition for the championship that he then won. But there's no doubt that Taffy Von Trips was the guy who was going to win the World Championship in 61 and deserved to, really. Well, absolutely for sure deserved to. He was super quick. And he sort of fell out with Phil at Spa when they were battling, a little bit Pironi, Villeneuve-ish. So they weren't great mates, I don't think, but he was a great guy. I mean, if you look at Bernard Caillet's book, the number of pictures where Von Trips is there just having a laugh in the background or doing this, doing that. I mean, what a great guy. Cool guy too. I've got a lovely book on Von Trips as well. So, yeah. Was he long or short corner? I have no idea. I can't tell enough from the footage I've seen. I don't think, my gut feeling is that he wasn't a short corner driver like Sterling or Tony Brooks, but I think he was, you know, very, very good. I think he was, let's find I mean, was he as quick as Jean Berra? Nigel Roebuck would probably say not, because he's the world's greatest Berra fan and Fernando Alonso fan, got to say. And that doesn't mean he's just a blind fan. He's a fan for a reason. But Von Trips was, yeah, I mean, he's quicker than Joe Bonnier for sure. Probably not as good as Dan Gurney. Good as John Surtees on his day. You know, that 61 Aintree, that was Surtees' 66 Spa, wasn't it? Just as good, really. So whenever you think Von Trips wasn't one of the greats, I would counsel you to look at that 61 British Grand Prix in the wet that he led virtually from start to finish in the Sharknose Ferrari. Superb drive. And who set fastest lap in that race? There's a good one. Tony Brooks in the BRM Climax. BRM running a Climax engine that year. So there you go. Tony Brooks still very quick in 61. Alex Fact. Okay, this is mixing politics with Formula One, but in a good way. This is Putin should run the whole of Europe. He's the only one capable of doing so. Bernie Ecclestone, 2014. What did I tell you? There you go. So as it happens, they're all closet Bernie fans. Melita Alves, sorry, Peter, do you think Red Bull and Max can fight for a championship? Yeah, I do. I do. I do. I think they're quite capable of winning the World Championship. Thank you very much. Probably both championships. Thank you very much. And don't discount them at all. Discount them at your peril. So, well, a lot of people seem to think, oh, well, you got no chance in the Constructors' Championship. I wouldn't have said that. Liam Lawson, Max Verstappen. Pretty good driver lineup. A lot stronger than Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, that's for sure. And it only takes the car to be half reasonable, and they're in good shape. As Max says, Liam as the wingman will make a big difference. So, anyway, Bang Gwyn. Hi, Peter. Do you prefer racetrack variety on any given Formula One season, or do you prefer a more set-in-stone race calendar? I love variety, but some seem to like a more static calendar. Well, I certainly love the way the World Rally Championship goes from Sweden to Kenya. One bite like that. I love that. I do think we go to some countries for the sake of it, just because it's good for Formula One's economy to be there. And then we just build this sort of Tilke 3DRS track with not much interest in it. And I just think, why do we bother? We might as well just get that country to sponsor a race in the middle of Europe and have it on a proper circuit. And don't forget, there are precedents for that. We have had a Swiss Grand Prix at Dijon in France. That's one. I'm trying to think. Oh, well, you always call it a European Grand Prix or whatever. You know, we've had 2 Italian Grand Prix in 1 year. 2 races in Italy in 1 year, no problem. 2 races in Britain. And so it goes on. So you could easily do that and massively reduce the carbon footprint, massively reduce the costs of traveling, and rapidly approach a more logical budget for the teams if you did that. So, yeah, you know, we had a little bit of that, didn't we, in the COVID year, whenever that was, 2020. And so if it means going to a country in order just to be there, and the track's boring and, you know, nobody really wants to be there anyway, why not have that race in Europe at a proper circuit? That's what I would do. Now, am I a fan of, do I prefer racetrack variety on any given Formula One season, or do I like a set-in-stone race calendar? What you mean by that is, do I like to see the calendar different every year and other races coming in and going and things like that? I don't know, really. I don't have much of a feel for that. I just think that races like the Malaysian Grand Prix should be on the calendar, and that the French Grand Prix should be on the calendar. We should have a German Grand Prix. And I mean, to me, it's completely illogical. We have a Belgian Grand Prix. We don't have a German Grand Prix. Where's the logic in that? Doesn't make sense. Or a French Grand Prix for that matter. And so, you know, I think we need a race in Scandinavia too. That's all I can say really. But in terms of the variety, I think we just got too many races as well. With too many races because everybody's desperate to make as much money as possible. That's why we do that. I don't like that. So where are we? Max Flashart. I know he's had a lot of questions, but this is worth saying. I think of all the cars I've owned and driven, the one I really miss is my 2004 CV8, Citroen V8 with LS1 and 6-speed manual. There you go. Yep. There's nothing to beat a 6-speed manual. I mean, the only time that you don't want a manual transmission really is if you're stuck on a motorway in the rain for 3 hours and it's just inching forward, whether it's the Pacific Coast Highway in California or the M1 in London. You don't want to have to constantly be using the clutch. But if you're on normal roads in normal countries and there's not much traffic and there's lovely corners, there's nothing nicer than going through the gears into a corner. I think it's just a great feeling, especially if it's easy to heel and toe, or you've got the rev coordination thing, which we've got on the Hyundai, which is just a joy. You put it into N mode with the rev thing, and it's just amazing. Love it. And you know, that car, I don't suppose you'll be able to buy cars like, you can't even buy them now. I don't think the Hyundai i20N in 5 years' time, they'll all be, you know, that was that era. Yeah, all electric now. interesting to see how many problems there are with electric cars. I see Audi VW just had to recall 60,000 cars or something, and lots of other issues going on. And I say that because electric cars, for me, still don't answer the problem of what they do with the batteries. We're talking about saving the planet now, and that's a big thing that needs always to be borne in mind. And then beyond that, there are still so many other areas that we don't do anything about, that we assume are okay because we drive around in electric cars, I guess. And I mentioned two of them. One is having duty-free shops in the departure area rather than the arrival area, and the aircraft having to carry ridiculous amounts of fuel and glass and weight, liquid and glass and weight around the world, massively increasing fuel costs and the carbon footprint. There's one. And two, all this business of all these stupid paper receipts that are still churned out everywhere. Most countries of the world still churn them out. You know, the rainforests are the ones that pay. And nobody seems to do anything about that either. Anyway, ranting on. Jeffrey B, thanks for all your insights. Peter, I look forward to all your videos. Is it the renewal of the Concord Agreement that always seems to dictate changes to the cars, or is it the FIA? Interesting. I don't think it's either. As I understand it, and I've always understood it in the past, the powers that be, in other words, representatives of the teams and the various commissions and the FIA, and to some extent the rights holders, sit around and decide what they're going to, the medium-term future of Formula One and where they should be going. Should they be going electric, not electric, hydrogen, whatever? And they come up with a broad brush approval of where Formula One should be going. And then the various divisions, the teams, the rights holders, the FIA, go away and think about how they can make that concrete and in what order it should be concrete and how they're going to make it happen. Now, whether or not there's a Concord Agreement to be signed within that period in which they're thinking, I think is a bit irrelevant. I think much more important, and you may say, well, that's part of the agreement, but part of the Concord Agreement, but much more important would be, in the case of Ferrari, for example, would be saying, well, that's fine, but we want more money. If we're going to commit to another 10 years and to this new thing that we're not that happy about, but we'll go that route. We want to be a much larger slice of the cake. Then they sit around and think about how they're going to do that. And you may say, well, then that's a new Concord Agreement, but it's not really. It's just Ferrari saying we want some more money. And then they put together a Concord Agreement around that program. So it's not so much the Concord Agreement is here, and so therefore we all have to find a new regulation to work within the Concord Agreement. It's just, I think the Concord Agreement is a result of the discussions of where they're going in the medium term. It's just a way of binding it all together. So, Enzo Blueblood, hi PW, Michael Schumacher changed the game on driver fitness, probably explains his acrobatic style. Who was the fittest in the 70s and 80s? Well, I think we can go a lot further. I mean, for me, the driver that changed the game on fitness was Sterling Moss. And he was, at a time when Alberto Ascari and Juan Manuel Fangio and Froilan Gonzalez, to name but three, were not super fit, shall we say, to be kind. Sterling was there, and Peter Collins, very fit. If you look at the pictures of Sterling in the mid-50s, talk about a new standard of fitness. And with the kidney belt on, I mean, he was as far ahead of his game physically as Michael Schumacher was. And so I think we should give Sterling a lot of credit for that. And some drivers then went that route. If you look at Jim Clark, he was always super fit in a Sterling Mossy sort of way. And of course, have to remember that in those days, there was so much racing, and they raced every weekend virtually, that there wasn't a lot of time to go out and be fit. They race cars to be fit. But I mean, Jim Clark was always very careful about what he ate, what he drank, and didn't drink, of course, but what he ate, and just the odd sip of champagne at the end of a race, I guess, and what he ate and how he ran his life. And he was very fit as well. But yeah, Michael took it to another level when he started to bring Techno Gym motorhomes to tests and to Grand Prix as well, where you could do a rowing session or a bike session after driving the car. And that kind of impressed people like David Coulthard, who then started to do the same thing. And yeah, and that kind of set the trend. Who was the fittest driver of the 70s and 80s? Carlos Reutemann always used to say, my gold standard for how hot it is Emerson Fittipaldi. If Emerson's feeling the heat and showing it, then it must be seriously hot out there. So Emerson was very fit in the 70s, very, very fit, as was Alan Prost when he came into Formula One at the end of the 70s, early 80s, very fit as well, did a lot of cycling even in those days. Jacques Lafitte, always skinny as a rake, very, very fit as well. Andrea de Cesaris did a lot of gym stuff, probably a bit too much, sort of Christian Cleany, a bit too much, gym and not enough actually focusing on what was important. Keke Rosberg smoked a lot, but he was fit. I mean, when you think about winning that Dallas Grand Prix 84, that was as hot as it gets. And yes, he had the benefit of a cool suit, but he was a fit guy, no doubt about it. I'm not sure he did that much training. I think his training amounted to going to the North Pole with Guy Edwards every year and racing snowmobiles, which was good fun. Why not? I mean, Gilles was fit. Gilles was fit. There was not an ounce of fat on Gilles Villeneuve. But most of that was just doing what he does, driving race cars. And when he wasn't driving race cars, he was in powerboats or whatever. He's just an action man, Gilles Villeneuve. Nigel Mansell, super fit. Not by today's standard. If you put the old fat clamp test on him, I suppose he would have had a bit, as did Alan Jones. But Nigel was very strong and very fit. What can you say? I can't remember a race. I can remember plenty of moments after the race when he was pretty much out of it, but I can't remember a race when he was hurt by lack of fitness or strength. At a time when there's a lot more energy, he had to go through the steering wheel anyway. Who else? I mean, if you think about guys like Felipe Massa, he was fit. Who was the fittest driver of the 80s? Difficult question. I mean, I wouldn't have said it was Ayrton, because Ayrton had that strange thing where he was paralyzed for part of his body and face when he was testing at Lotus at the end of the year, and then he had that weird thing in Brazil in '94 when he spun out of the race out of a hairpin, and I've always wondered whether he had that same thing then and never mentioned it, because it was very like Ayrton to just lose a car on a 90-degree hairpin like that. Well, sorry, 90-degree spin out of a hairpin. It was very unlike Ayrton. Yeah. So Gerhard Berger, I'm thinking about Gerhard, always had to be a bit careful because he broke his neck, didn't he, in that road accident. Nigel had broken neck too, so had to bear that in mind. Graham Hill always had a neck problem. So a lot of these guys had to nurse other injuries, so they weren't as fit perhaps as they should have been. But Dan Gurney, I'd say, was always very fit. Michael, extremely fit. He was the first guy, I suppose, who, after a race, when he took his helmet and balaclava off, didn't have wet hair. He was the first guy you could say that about, probably. Whereas for everybody prior to Michael, it was a badge of distinction if you had wet hair and looked knackered. Theo says, I'm sure Australia will be a fight between Max and Lewis. Wow. Max on the first day was doing an excellent race sim. Both Ferrari and Red Bull are sandbagging. Well, we've got lots of opinions there. And we got Melbourne, which is a fairly sort of bland, weird racetrack for me. Not many great corners. It's just a funny place where the grip picks up as the weekend develops. And it's a question of the car and the driver picking up pace as that grip develops and living with any variables to do with the weather, the rain, the wind, whatever, and the leaves. But there aren't any, I'll just say, there aren't any outstanding corners for me in Melbourne. And so I think they'll all be quite good there as a result. I can see Max sort of, you know, the car won't be brilliant, but he'll still be right there. I can see one of the two McLaren drivers, maybe Oscar, getting it really together. And I can see George and both Ferrari drivers being right there. Lewis probably will look better in the last 40 laps of the race than he does in the first 40 laps of Friday, maybe. I can see Lewis going into Melbourne thinking of the last 40 laps, even before he gets in the car. And that's when he's going to be the guy with the best balanced car and the best tyres on the racetrack, and he can get a result. And that's how I think he'll go into that weekend, that first weekend. So, Bangwin. I also wanted to ask a newbie question since I started watching Formula One in 21. What a way to start. What key things do you think what things do you pay attention to in pre-season testing? Thank you for all you do from Finland. Thank you. Thank you. Love Finland, by the way. Great country. Looking forward to going there for the Rally of Finland this year. Again. Not much, actually. I didn't actually watch that much of it because to me, you can't tell what fuel they're running, what they're doing with the car. You know, to me, it wasn't something where you can sit down and watch and draw that many conclusions from. I think all the conclusions that we can draw we've mentioned already. So I look to see how everybody's going through 9 and 10, but I'm still frustrated by turns 9 and 10 in Bahrain, frustrated by the camera angles the TVs has there. You can't really tell. They cut away and they're going through 9, it's a pan shot, and then they cut away and then you see, and you can't really see the difference. But if you're there, you can. So you have to try to see what they're doing, comparing one with another. And it's quite difficult to do that in testing because they're very rarely on track more than one car at a time. So, you know, because you can't do those comparisons, I find testing on TV, watching it on TV is quite difficult to draw any conclusion at all. Do you think the flexible wings are going to dictate how the season pans out? No, I don't actually. I think Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes did their thing with the FIA, and the FIA have now come out with fairly comprehensive rulings, and front wing obviously has got a longer stay of life, and so that it might affect things up to, say, is it Spanish Grand Prix? I think they're going to do it. But in general, I think there'll be a lot more control of what's going on there. So I don't think it will be that, no. I think that may reduce McLaren's advantage a little bit. They've still got a very good car. And as Scarb says, you know, that moving of the front steering arms forward like that may give them a nice little aero boost at the front of the car, under the front of the car. But they seem to be more radical in what they're doing over the winter than any other team in that respect. And it's already a good car. So I think it's, I don't think the flexi wings will play as big a part as they did last year. That's my answer. David Elkammer. Hi, Peter. Great commentary and stories. Thank you very much. I spoke to Jody's son, Thomas, a lot and saw him win the 2005 Bombardier Learjet 500. Yeah, great guy. I think, you know, both Toby and Thomas, very good guys, Jody's sons. Sadly, Jody lost his daughter, but both good guys. And I think certainly Thomas had a career. He potentially could have made Formula One, but Jody wasn't going to put up the money to race in Bernie's Formula 2 or Formula 3, that's for sure, and quite rightly so. And he had a good career, pretty good career in America as a result. And good luck to him. I've got a lot of time for the Scheckter family. And I went to see Jody not that long ago. I think he's living in Italy now, but he was still in England on the big estate he's got there. And he had this amazing dog, and it was definitely a hybrid dog. It wasn't a pedigree, but it was a good farm dog, quick. And I said, well, you know, cool dog, Jody. He said, yeah, he goes with me everywhere. Watch this. And Jody gets in he's got some sort of SUV. I guess it was a Merc or something. And he flattens the throttle on the Merc down the driveway. And the dog runs absolutely alongside Jody. And Jody's trying to race the dog in the SUV. Brilliant. And I spent many a good year with Jody. I used to write a column with him for various magazines. So that was always wonderful on the phone to Jody, doing these columns with him. Then, of course, I had that famous day when I drove with him and Gilles Villeneuve in Jody's chocolate brown Ferrari 400 from Monaco to Fiorano one morning, where they were testing that day, and back that night in the same car on those lovely roads from France to Italy, and just the three of us in the car, me in the back, obviously. And yeah, what a time that was. Jody, amazing. And I saw his, I didn't see him drive. I obviously saw him in Formula 2 and Formula 3 and Formula Ford, but I missed his Grand Prix debut, which I guess was the Glen 72. But the first time I saw him drive was, well, I was at the French Grand Prix 73. Let's get it round to it. And that was the race I drove down in my 1100 Escort Mark 1, with very worried about the radiator level and filling it up every stop, every garage. Elf garage, you always tried to go to Elf, filling it up with water. And we made it down there. Anyway, we went to the French Grand Prix at Ricard, and we were watching from the outside of scene, Peter Collins and I. And it was a very hot Sunday. And I'll never forget the sight of the field, the Formula One field. No chicanes on that back straight then. After they get through the back of the circuit, it's just a long, long straight into scene. We were on the outside of scene. And the field coming towards you, heat haze shimmering off the track, just this sort of moving ball of colour, which was the field of cars, growing more and more in focus as it approached you. And at the front of the field, there was Jody Scheckter's Yardley McLaren M23. And I remember shouting, "It's Scheckter!" like this. And yeah, he was late turn in, oversteery. And of course, by the time he won his championship in 79, he was a little bit more circumspect and leaving all that stuff to Gilles and driving within himself. But in those days, he was just, amazing. Car control like you wouldn't believe. Super good in everything he did, whether it was Can-Am Porsches, whether it was that Formula 2 McLaren, lovely little Ralph Bellamy car, or Formula 5000 in the Trojan against Brian Redman and Mario Andretti and Al Unser. Jody Scheckter. Max Flashart said, booing at a launch event before the season is not cool. Yeah, well, I agree with you 100%. I think it's... Booing at the track is fine. It's slightly... I think maybe I do agree with you. I mean, I just think that there's a time and place for things like that, and as you say, that event was not the place to do it. Hi, Peter. Can you discuss the difference from Silabo again between Lewis and Kimi's driving style? Do you mean Kimi Räikkönen or the great Kimi? I'm assuming you mean Kimi Räikkönen. And if that's the case, if providing we select Kimi Räikkönen at his peak at McLaren, I would say not much difference at all. I think very, very similar. Their ability to feel the rotation point as it changes corner to corner, lap to lap, to lengthen the straight into which you approach that rotation point, and then to get the car rotated at exactly the right rate and angle for extending the straight on exit, to have as little load as possible going through the car on acceleration. I think they both very, very similar. The difference, of course, is that Kimi only kept that level of sensitivity and touch for about a season and a half, whereas Lewis has had that level since 2007, arguably through to 2023 and a half. I don't think he was at that level last year or this year. Sorry, last year or the year before, because of the way the Mercedes was, and because of his lack of time in a car as bad as a Mercedes, and the only way he could drive it was pretty much like how most Grand Prix drivers perform. And we've seen already in Bahrain that he hasn't changed much so far, and he's still driving pretty much as he did in 2024. But I suspect we may not see it in Melbourne, because Melbourne is a circuit where you can easily fall off the rails very quickly. As I say, the grip changes all the time there. There's a lot of variables come into play in Melbourne. But when we get to a proper proper circuit, I mean, I wouldn't say Melbourne's not a proper circuit. It is. It's a lovely circuit in many ways, but it's not a place you'd want to start playing around if you're not 100% confident with short corners. And I'm not sure Lewis is after a year and a half of not using them. And I think when we get to Bahrain, it'll be a different story. Bahrain for the race. I think if he's not doing it then, as I said earlier in the piece, I think we all need to think, wow, what's happening with Lewis? Because I can tell you one thing, Charles will be doing that. That's for sure. Charles will probably be doing that in Melbourne. It'd be interesting to compare them a little bit into that tight, about turn 4, isn't it? The tight right-hander at the end of the longish straight into there. A little bit into turn 1. Difficult with the TV cameras they have there, the angles to see it. But it'd be really interesting to compare Charles with Lewis into those corners. Max says, booing the FIA is critical, not the staff, just MBS. Well, yeah, but I don't know. I just think, what do I think? I think there's time and a place. That's all. I think we all need. It's a bit like the whole swearing thing. It's up to the teams. It's up to the PR media department of the teams to make sure their drivers know exactly when it's appropriate to swear, if you must, and when it's not appropriate. It's not difficult. It's not appropriate at that F175 launch. Maybe it's appropriate at a sports event. I'm not sure it's appropriate on the podium. I think it may be appropriate during the race. But on the podium, when it's kind of all over and we're all saying, right, we're shaking hands now and this is it, I don't think that's the moment to boo. If you want to boo somebody, you can do it during the race. That's all right, kind of. But then again, bear in mind, I'm not a fan of live golf. And I don't like the thought. I don't think that golf suffers because in normal golf, people don't shout and scream and it's pretty quiet. I love that. That's what I love. It's respect for the course. It's respect for nature. It's respect for the sport. And I don't think golf is any better for people shouting and screaming and throwing their plastic beer cups onto the tee and everybody saying, isn't that wonderful? And then loud music coming through the PA. It's not golf. And I don't think that's the podium in Grand Prix racing either. But it could be during the race. I don't mind it during the race. Obviously, don't throw things on the track, but it's okay, Max has made a brilliant pit stop. Boo, we don't want him to beat Lewis or whatever it is, or vice versa. That's okay. But on the podium, that's a personal thing. And I'm not sure. I think every human being, as I say, needs to look in the mirror before they do that. M. Ken. Also, have you ever thought about doing commentary work with F1 TV or Sky? You'd be a great addition with incredible. Well, I've done it with both, actually. What does that tell you? Got fired from both. Probably for being too opinionated. But thank you very much for saying that. Yeah, I've done F1 TV many times. I've done Sky many times, and loved it. But the best times for Sky for me were doing the commentary for the Japanese Super Formula races with Andrew Marriott when Pedro de la Rosa was winning them all. That was brilliant. I love that. Anyway, yeah, thank you. I think I'm probably much too opinionated for those august bodies there to employ, but I don't know. If they do, I'd certainly pick up the phone if they rang. Silabu again. Peter, do you think Lewis will manage to cope with Charles' qualifying pace despite his good race pace? Well, this is the question, isn't it? I said before, I think if the car is a championship winning car, which by definition means if the Ferrari is a very quick car, 80%, 85% of the time throughout the season, Lewis, I'm just checking to see if Dexter's still there. He is. Then I think Lewis will win races. I think he will out-qualify Charles, but not. I think Charles will have the qualifying edge. And Charles will probably be the driver more likely to win the World Championship. But I think Lewis will out-qualify Charles on occasions and some races, not just on occasions, several times. It'd probably be, I'd be surprised if it's worse than 60-40. Might be 55-45, something like that. And I think Lewis will be quite capable of winning Grand Prix if the car is a winning car on the day. And I say that because you have to keep saying that. Some races, some teams, even if they're quick, have terrible bouncing or whatever, and they never get over it. or by the time they got over it, they've lost everything else. So, but Charles, don't underestimate Charles Leclerc. This guy, I've said for the last 5 years, this guy is up there with Lewis and Max in terms of his ability to drive his short corners and have the finesse to do so on a regular basis. He's really quick. He's really good. Yes, he has other issues that Max doesn't have, that Lewis doesn't have. And a lot of them are involved around his emotions and driving for Ferrari and his career path anyway. Every driver's different. And in Charles' case, you could say his soft underbelly is his emotion. But, as time goes on, you've got to assume that A, he's going to get over that, and B, he's going to learn from Lewis. He's very capable of learning from Lewis, Charles Leclerc. That's the other scary thing. From a Lewis perspective, Charles Leclerc will learn from Lewis Hamilton, believe me. And it won't be asking him questions. It'll be watching and observing and knowing that he's benefiting from having this guy in the other car. Cornish Darren Fewins. Going to have to wind up soon, guys. Sorry. It's been a good 2-hour stint. If Lewis wins this year, what would be the motivation for him to remain as a driver in Formula One, other than the money? Oh, that's an interesting question, because you could argue, you could rephrase it and say, if Lewis doesn't win this year, what would be the motivation for him to remain as a driver in Formula One? He's done everything. He's gone to Ferrari. He's done it, and he still hasn't won. I mean, you're saying, well, if he wins, what motivation? Well, I don't think you need to worry about that, Cornish Darren Fewins, because he's won 7 world championships and he's still highly motivated. So I don't think winning has ever been a problem for Lewis in terms of keeping his motivation. The only problem he's had would be, the only problem he potentially would have had would have been post 21, when he lost the championship, he lost his teammate, and he lost a quick car all in one go and had to begin 22 in a totally different situation. And he, to his credit, he kind of kept his motivation there. Obviously, he was thinking pretty soon afterwards about going to Ferrari, and that kept him going, I guess. But he's still pretty motivated in terms of wheel to wheel with guys like Berman and Magnussen and those guys. Not afraid to mix it and not afraid to get at it and change his driving style as well to suit the car. That's commitment as well, isn't it? Challenger says Peter will never do commentary because he won't be told what to say. Well, yeah, I guess you're right. Sad, isn't it? I've had many a director in my ear saying, Peter, say this, say that, this has happened, and I've just ignored them. Didn't you hear me? No, I didn't hear it, no. Sorry. Jeffrey B. The only Formula One race I've been to was the 82 Long Beach Grand Prix. If I'm remembering correctly, it was a mix of V12s, V8s, turbos, V4s. Will we ever get turbo 4s? Will we get back to that choice of engine variety? Definitely not. No, they love to template everything now, and the engine's very templated now in terms of configuration, cylinders, everything else. So that's never going to happen. So just enjoy thinking about Long Beach 82 and that very wide mix of mechanical components we had, and how amazing it was. I mean, it wasn't great for the Cosworth drivers because the turbos by then were getting to be really quick, and it was very easy to out-qualify a Cosworth car and then just hold it up in the race around the corners and blast away down the straight. So it became very boring. And that happened in 81, really. So if you're in a turbo car, it was quite fun because they're getting more and more power by the millisecond. And, Brabham were bringing in fuel stops, and all things were changing, weren't they? So it was an interesting time technically. And when you think about Gordon Murray and what he was doing there with the fuel stops and building effectively a car with a fuel tank that wouldn't finish the race, then, those things wouldn't happen either. You can't start a race now unless the car has enough fuel in it to do the Grand Prix distance. Danny London. Hi, Peter. Did you ever meet Gary Cooper from Elgin Cars? Well, it was Elfin Cars, actually, but it's probably your finger there. I'm sure you know it's Elfin. Yes, I did meet Gary Cooper, and I met him when he was doing Formula 5000, actually. And always a fan of Elfin's, always. I was looking at more pictures that I found here. I was sent, the first trip I made back to Australia was in 84 when I was working for Autocar, and Mitsubishi paid for me to go back to South Australia to look at the new Lonsdale plant they were building there near Adelaide, Lonsdale being the Australian version of the Mitsubishi. And I couldn't believe it. They flew us out club class. I really loved that trip. Stayed at the Adelaide Hilton. I went on to Sydney after that and did my own thing and then came back. But And there was a little, there wasn't a hill climb, but it was a sort of retro sprint going on for classic race cars. And I was looking through these photos that I took, and there was a 1.5 litre Formula Junior 1964 Elfin there. And I took about 300 pictures of it because I hadn't seen one of those cars, one of those Elfins, since I'd been in Australia at Catalina Park or wherever, Warwick Farm in 63, 64. Absolutely beautiful little car, space frame Formula Junior car, Gary Cooper. And yeah, I met Gary, softly spoken, lovely guy, amazing man, you know, sort of Ron Toronac level, didn't leave Australia and did everything he did in Australia, but so many nice Elfins. And when he went to the monocoque, that was a great car, particularly in the hands of Alfredo Costanzo in the Formula 2 guys. And those early Elfins were wonderful. I was less a fan of the, you know, when they got to be big engine sports cars and 5000s, only because it was so dangerous. And I'd lost, we lost a very, very talented driver called Bevan Gibson, who was driving an Elfin Can-Am, ex-Frank Maddich Elfin, effectively Can-Am car, 5 litre V8 Elfin at Bathurst, when the thing just took off, and sadly he was killed on the straight, on Conrod Straight. And his brother, interestingly, Grant, became one of the leading mechanics at the Williams Formula 1 team, and he was there when I was there. We were great buddies, Grant and I, and because we had, you know, I'd never met Bevan Gibson, as it happened, but I certainly knew of him and how quick he was. Anyway, he was in an Elfin. And then, you know, we had a spate of accidents. Obviously, Gary had his accident. Max Stewart, I think, was in an Elfin 5000 car when he was killed as well. So there was that back end of the Elfin thing always left me slightly, I don't know, slightly weird feelings. But I loved those Elfins in the 60s, particularly. And what a talented engineer Gary Cooper was. So, okay. Where are we going now? Let's Danny London says Formula One for Phillip Island, great second tier Formula One venue. Yep, Phillip Island. Yep, I've been to Phillip Island too. Went there for Australian Motoring News. Flew down unbelievably in a light aircraft. If I think about it now, probably fairly dodgy thing. Landing in the winds. Remember the penguins and the onshore breeze and Phillip Island. It was a round of the Australian Touring Car Championship from memory. I was covering it from Australian Motoring News, Tom Floyd. Great place, lots of great corners. Yeah, be a good Grand Prix circuit. I can't imagine how Formula One would get all its paraphernalia in there, but they might say, we're going to have the Grand Prix. That's what I would say anyway. If I was at Liberty, I'd say, we're going to have the Grand Prix there. There's no room for the paddock, no room for motorhomes, just going to have the pit lane as it is. But if you don't want to race, no problem. If you do want to race, you're going to make your money. Yeah, great place. Many circuits like that in the world. And Brands Hatch, why not? Yeah, let's go back to Brands. So, what are we doing here? Nicola Abate says, I remember reading an article. He still doesn't know why he was let go. I think this is about, you know, the race director, why he was let go. And I think, you know, there you go. Says it all. It's a funny environment there, isn't it? FIA. Subramanya. Hi, Mr. Windsor. What do you think about Lewis's confidence in testing? Do you think he's confident enough? And how does Ferrari's car work with his style? Well, I think, I mean, it was a wonderful thing Lewis said once when he was at McLaren, you know, and then winning all those. Oh, he was at Mercedes, actually, I think. About his second or third year at Mercedes. He'd already won a championship at Mercedes anyway, and it was the first test in Barcelona. And I remember interviewing him for F1 TV, actually. And I said, so Lewis, you okay? Or something like that. And he said, well, at least today I found I can still do it. I can still drive. And I thought, wow, that's pretty good. Coming from a multi-world champion. Obviously, he was joking, but, you know, I think deep down inside, 1% of him was thinking, I wonder if I can still do this. I haven't done it for a while. I wonder if I can still feel what I need to feel to do it. And I love that about Lewis. You know, he's very, very natural like that. Anyway, I think we saw a little bit of that at Ferrari and Bahrain. I think it was, wow, there's so many big things here. You know, the red overalls, the press, everything. You know, I had the shunt in Barcelona, the new car, Charles. I'm just going to put my head down, stay quiet, do my thing, and I'm not going to be too extravagant with the car or the driving, just let it come to me. And he was quick, wasn't he? You know, he was quick, and he didn't do anything spectacular with the car in terms of, as I say, with short corners or anything, but he was still quick. And what does that tell you? It tells you it's the same old Lewis. So does the Ferrari work with his style? If it's got grip and turn-in, it'll work with his style. That's all it needs to be. If he doesn't have a front end and it's inconsistent, well, that's a different story. But if he's got a front end that he can work with and it's consistent lap to lap and he can feel the surface of the road, count him in. Mazen Banut says, hello, Peter. Speaking of short corners, I remember the first time I felt it in the sim, and I've been able to be within the 20 fastest times in the world ever since. Best driving advice ever. Oh, wow, that's good to hear. A lot of people say, what the hell are you talking about, Peter? You know, when I look back now at Carlos Reutemann and what he used to say before I really understood what short corners were all about and what we were doing it, Carlos used to talk about seeing the exit of the corner, but even before he had turned in, and he used to talk about crushing the sidewall of the Pirelli of the Michelin tire at a time when they were radials and the Goodyears were cross plies, at exactly the right moment that he would get some sort of spring effect that he could feel mid-corner at rotation. All that adds up to all the things that are part of having the finesse and touch and feel of being a great short corner driver. And I'm amazed that you're able to feel that on a sim. I'd be interested to know what sim that was. And, you know, that's pretty impressive. And I'm glad you did feel it, because it is, it's an amazing feeling if you can do it. And the amazing feeling, part of it is how quickly you can go into a corner where others are already starting to find a point where they want to do their braking in a straight line or this or that. You're still going super quick into a different point altogether with the car slightly moving in change of direction, but then you're braking into a different point. And you don't worry about how slow you have to go to rotate. No problem at all, and just get the rotation perfect. It's an incredible feeling. As I say, there aren't that many corners in the world today where you can actually benefit massively from that. But in order to do that, you've got to have so much touch and feel to live with the understeer, massage the understeer, that amazing level of touch and feel will also help you on other parts of any boring circuit. That goes without saying. Danny London, did you see the Daytona 500? Sadly not. Tough drivers, no one whinging about a bit of rubbing. Does Formula One use spotters around the track to see car behaviour? I don't think they do, no. Or driver behaviour or any behaviour. They all sit there glued over their telemetry, don't they? I don't think they do that at all. And the couple of times that Rob Wilson, that some teams or drivers have had the brains to employ Rob Wilson and fly him to a race and get him to go and watch what their drivers are doing and what the car is doing on various parts of the circuit, there's always been a beneficial result. Always. That's not going to happen now. Rob's not in the best of health. But teams up very quickly after a while thought, oh, we don't need that. The telemetry will tell us everything. That's the problem. There's so much telemetry in Formula One compared with, say, NASCAR that, well, I imagine there is. I don't want to in any way say there isn't a lot of telemetry in NASCAR. I don't know what I'm talking about there. Maybe there's a lot in NASCAR. I'll rephrase that. There is so much telemetry in Formula One that they think that they know everything that's going on. So they don't need to see any more. As I said, there's no way current telemetry will measure the difference between the car that Charles Leclerc has just got absolutely flat on the throttle mid-corner and the amount of load he's putting through it laterally, and the amount of load that's going through a car driven by, say, Carlos Sainz, exactly the same car, at exactly the same point of the road. There's no way telemetry will show that. It'll show when the throttle's flat. It'll show when it's just almost flat. It'll show all those increments. What it won't show is the exact load that's going through the car and the tyres and what it's doing to the outer sidewall of the tyre. Partly because we don't have that information anyway from Pirelli, but partly because we don't measure it anyway. How can you measure that dynamic load? We're talking milliseconds of dynamic weight. Zishan Asfar. I'm going to have to make this the last one, I think, Guy. How good was Jean Alesi when he drove for Ferrari from 91 to 95? What was his best attribute? Can you see the modern day comparisons to Charles Leclerc? He wasn't, I mean, he went into corners unbelievably early. but he didn't have a lot of feel for understeer, and he wasn't very finessey with what he did. His way of driving was just absolutely straight line, early turn in, like you wouldn't believe. Never braking with steering lock, just braking absolutely in a straight line, but an incredible V into the corner. And then all bets were off, really. If he had a good car, like the Tyrrell on Pirellis, he could then do a nice rotation and he'd get a nice job out of it and do what he did in Phoenix. But 9 times out of 10, he didn't have a great car mid-corner with not much at the rear going on. He had a lot of power and you know, everything was all over the place, and it didn't work for him. And he never got it out of that level. It was a little bit like Sebastian Vettel, but with less finesse than Sebastian Vettel. Incredibly fast. This is Alesi now. If he had a great front end and consistent balance, incredibly fast in the way he went into corners. But he couldn't live with anything that wasn't spot on. Jacques Lafitte drove the same way, but had more finesse, definitely, than Jean Alesi, in my opinion. And he could do more with a bad car mid-corner as a result. And I think Vettel even more so than Lafitte. Not much more. Jacques was very, very good. Very good. So that was, I think what he has in common with, perhaps with Vettel and Lafitte, was that he never really got any better. He just stayed the same. And I think that was throughout his Ferrari career. I don't think he was the same. I don't think he was any better at the end of his Ferrari career than he was at the beginning. So I don't see any comparisons with Charles Leclerc, because Leclerc does his stuff with, he's got curves that he's managing. He's not managing straight lines. He's managing curves into the corner. And that's another level of brilliance. That's Max, that's Lewis, that's Carlos Reutemann, that's Sterling Moss, and some others. So Nigel Mansell, and that's that was not Jean Alesi. Leclerc, different class to Alesi, in my opinion. We'll make this the last, shall we? Before I say that, let me just check if there are any other super chats that I've missed. I hope I haven't. Just scrolling down. So many questions I never got to. I'm so sorry that I haven't. 2 hours, and there's still at least another 2 hours worth of questions. So all I can say is I'll be doing another live stream soon, guys. But I'll just do this last question from Cornish Darren. Which circuit currently not on the calendar would you like to see back? Well, yeah, easy answer. Sepang, Malaysia. Love Sepang. Great circuit. Great country, because it always had variables, the rain, the heat, and lovely corners there. Really miss it. So there we go. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part and for allowing me to do these live streams. I'm sort of shrinking in my Alpine Stars jacket here because it is cold and wet. I can't believe it's still cold and wet outside. What is going on? It's going to be like this. We're looking to book the next round of golf, and then there's nothing till Monday not this Friday week. Can you believe it? Is when we're going to get all the sunshine back in Spain. Anyway, everyone's saying, well, serves you right for living in Spain. Now you know what it's like for the rest of us. Anyway, if you're in Queensland, wherever up north, and in Australia, hope you're safe and well. And it goes to everybody around the world. Hope you're all safe and well. And it's an interesting season ahead of us, I think. Looking forward to seeing all the cars out there on track in Melbourne. I'm not planning to read too much into what we see in Melbourne because, as I've said, it's a fairly odd circuit. I'd rather see them around a circuit with a bit more structure to it. But as an event, as seeing all the Grand Prix cars there, the new guys on the grid, everything, it's going to be a lot to look forward to there as well. And the Rally of Kenya, shouldn't forget that either. So on that note, I think thanks for watching again. Be safe and see you very soon.